Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jimmy Miller, the digital editor for Lawn and Landscape Magazine. You're here for today's event, inside the 2026 Home Services Benchmark Report, what the data reveals. And most operators are flying blind. You know your revenue, you know your headcount, but do you know how your technicians actually compare to high-performing teams nationwide? We're joined today by Andy Williamson, the head of solutions engineering at Applause, to answer that question and much more. Andy, take it away.
Thank you, Jimmy. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in. Appreciate everyone's time today and looking forward to talking a little bit about how we can help define what a great technician looks like in 2026. We'll talk through sort of our industry benchmarks. We'll talk a little bit about how you as operators can set your team up for success and define excellence. And then we'll spend some time talking about what we call the service led growth model, which is really leaning into doing an excellent job and letting that derive revenue for your business. So, thinking about sort of things that I'd love for everyone to get out of the webinar today. I would love everyone to walk away with a couple key insights from our benchmark report. We spent a lot of time and effort analyzing over 3,000 different companies' data and looking at really what does great look like. So a couple of really interesting insights in there that I think everyone can take away as some nuggets. And then we'll talk about these five pillars of service-led growth. And I think each of these can apply to the green industry in a strong way. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing we'll talk about is what does great look like? And as we all know, the technician in the green industry is really the fundamental unit of the business. The more we can get out of our techs, the better the business runs on every single level. But before we can start to optimize technician performance, we need to understand what are we aiming for? What does great look like? And what can we realistically expect to get out of our team in terms of performance? So what we'll spend a few minutes here on is walking through industry averages and then how the Applause customer database compares with those industry averages and some of the insights that we've taken away from that analysis. So what makes up this report? And by the way, at the end of this presentation, there will be a QR code for you to scan to grab this report. We're happy to send it as a leave behind for anyone that's interested. But effectively, we analyzed over 18,000 different performance data points. We looked at 3,000 different companies in the home services industry, largely companies that are in the green industry and in the pest control industry, a little bit of HVAC and plumbing in there as well. And then we pulled detailed insights from over 600 different technician surveys. So we did both some quantitative research in terms of the metrics and qualitative by reaching out to technicians, asking what they think about different topics, what motivates them. We looked at 12 months of data across our Applause customer base. And ultimately, what's in that report that we'll send out that you'll have access to afterwards is a rubric that will help you level set your team against the industry and bring that performance to the next level so that you know, how am I doing compared to what else is out there? After we run through the data, the question I'd like everyone to ask themselves is, are we getting the most out of our teams? Is there maybe an opportunity to align interests better and get more out of your team? So let's jump into it. But before we kick things off, I want to take a quick second to get a poll for the group, and talk a little bit about your technicians. So the question here is about how many of your guys have been in the industry for 5 years or more. And the options are, one or two of my guys, less than 10%, about 25%, or more than 50%, more than half. So again, it's how many of your team, how many of your technicians out in the field have been in the industry for 5 years or more. Give everyone a second to complete that. Great. Yeah. So when we look at those results, can see, a lot are really falling. 66% are falling within that about 25% or less than 10%, which lines up really closely with a lot of the data that we pulled. There's always going to be some folks that are more experienced, but what we'll talk through here is that there's this idea sometimes that tenure or experience equates great performance, but that doesn't always line up per se. Because what we found when we ran the demographics on our surveys was that the vast majority of top performing teams in our data set, so again, this is just looking at customers that are using Applause, had mostly early career technicians. Actually, in our data set, a whopping 73% of technicians in the data set had 5 or less years of experience in the industry. Um, Further, only 7% of techs on top performing teams have been in the industry for more than 10 years. So the implications here are pretty massive. This means that, sort of contrary to what's often assumed, tenure is actually not strongly correlated with performance, and early career techs can absolutely deliver high quality service that results in high online ratings, high NPS scores, low reservice rates, and ultimately high customer retention. So for those of us who see early career talent as a blocker or as a reason that maybe our team isn't meeting expectations, it's possible that we may actually be focused on the wrong problem. The difference between a great technician and a subpar technician is more about how we train, treat, and coach our techs once they join the team, and is far less to do with how much experience they have overall, which is it's empowering. I've often, when I talk with customers or talk with people in the industry, I often hear like, that people don't work quite as hard as the past generation can often be the sentiment. But I think often it's maybe just meeting those folks where they need to be in terms of incentivizing them and measuring it the right way. The next insight I wanted to talk through is a hallmark of a top performing company is a company that offers clear growth and training opportunities for their staff. As we can see, employees start to view their employment as a long-term career if we put that path in front of them rather than sort of a dead-end job where they don't feel like there's any opportunity. So when we place those incentives and those prospects of a long-term career, people get excited and they're much more likely to stick around for the long term. The next piece of insight or data that I wanted to talk about is that customer feedback was actually more of a motivator here than money. What's interesting, in my opinion, is contrary to popular belief, while money and pay obviously matter, we can see in the graph that customer satisfaction and knowing, hey, my job matters, my work matters, comes in at a higher 11% higher as the primary source of motivation for technicians, right? So ultimately, after talking to those 600 technicians, what we found was that people care more about doing a great job. And while this may come as a surprise to some here on the call, when we zoom out and think about it for a second, it makes a lot of sense. Fundamentally, people want to know that they're making a difference in the world, and that people receiving that feedback that they're doing great, that they're going above and beyond, makes them feel like I'm making an impact. So an excellent way here to make sure that your technicians realize that desire of wanting to make a difference is by giving them instant feedback, constant feedback on things that customers are saying that are positive. Whenever they get a positive feedback, positive customer satisfaction survey, letting them know so they realize the hard work I'm putting out there and when I'm sweating my butt off in the summer is paying off because my customers are happy and they love what I'm doing. The next piece here that we'll talk about is what does great look like when it comes to customer satisfaction? Based on our data set, 70% of customers that are using Applause report an NPS, which, by the way, NPS is not something that Applause created. It's a fancy term, fancy consultant speak for Net Promoter Score, or effectively what percentage of my customers are happy and actively want to promote my business. And what we found is that of our Applause customer base, 70% are within that 90 to 99 range out of 100. So extremely satisfied, a high percentage of folks that want to promote your business. Only a small segment reported scores below that, with those true outliers coming in below 70. So in other words, when we look at the companies that are using something like Applause, 80% of that Applause customer base ranks in the top 10% of all service businesses when focusing on metrics, when focusing on the lens of customer satisfaction. The other benchmark and piece of data that we were able to pull here was, what does great look like? What does exceptional look like for online reviews? And while this says public reviews here, this data is overwhelmingly referring to Google reviews. And when we look at those numbers, 75% of companies that use Applause hold on average a Google rating between 4.8 and 4.99 stars, which is world class. There's a lot of data to support anything above 4.8 stars can lead to as much as a 31% increase in your sales. 14% fall within that 4.5 to 4.79 range, which is still seen as competitive. Um, and it was just 7.6% had a perfect 5.0 star rating, which is very hard to achieve for anyone that runs a business. And then there was less than 3% that fall below that average of 4.5. When we compare with the industry average, which in the green industry is 4.1 to 4.4 stars on Google, a company that's technically doing better than average in the industry at 4.5 stars would still fall in that bottom 20% of companies that are using Applause. So truly some very innovative and forward-thinking companies here. The next piece that we'll speak to is not just quality of reviews, but also the volume of reviews. When we analyzed that data set of 3,000 customers, we found that while quality moves the needle, that quantity and that visibility is what's going to help you drive that inbound traffic and make sure that your name's out there in terms of a great business to work with. When we analyzed the data set, we found that 44% of businesses generated more than 500 reviews just in the year 2025, and 24% generated north of 1,000 reviews in a single year. When we compare that with the industry, that average is coming in at around 40 to 80 new reviews in a year, with anyone that's over 500 reviews being considered a top 10% performer in most markets. So as we talk here later about the 5 pillars of growth and some of the lessons learned from looking at these top performing companies, you can have a lot of confidence that based on the data we're pulling and the lessons that we're pulling from some of these very top performing companies, that we're truly talking about some of the top and best performing companies in the green industry across the nation. Let's go through another poll here. What I would love to hear as we get into the busy season. Let's look at some benchmarks here, and would love to hear from the group. Of the following options below, which metrics do you want your team to improve this season? A, reservice or callback rate. B, drive time or windshield time as it's sometimes referred to. C, time on site. Or D, technician punctuality. I'm sure if you got a tech to do all 4 of those, that would be amazing, right? But if you had to pick one that you really want your team to improve on, what would that look like for this season? Give everyone a second here to fill out that poll. Great. Okay, so looks like reservices are coming in strong here, with drive time and time on site following close behind. That actually lines up very closely with what I often hear in the industry, right? We'll talk about this here in a second, but reservices can really be a huge drain on profitability and on your growth, right? So love that everyone's thinking about that, as how can we find ways to do a better job the first time so we're not having to go back and reservice our customers. So let's talk about sort of the baseline for some of those metrics and what we can realistically shoot for. On reservices in the green industry, what we found was that sub 2% is really the new normal. Based on our research, top performing companies in the green industry are aiming for or consistently achieving below that 2% callback rate. And reservices can become extremely costly to the business. On average, in the green industry, a reservice will cost you 20 to 30 bucks when you factor in labor, product, fuel, and actually that figure has been trending up recently as fuel prices have been going up. So the more often we can do a better job the first time and not have to go back, that's just extra money and savings in your pockets. For context, a company with 25 technicians out in the field, assuming they're running a full route, if they're able to reduce their reservices rate from 5%, which is around that industry average, down to 2%, they can expect annual savings of around $60,000 to $75,000. So as we strive to build fast-growing and profitable businesses, keeping reservices rates low is a huge growth lever and will ultimately help you realize those goals far quicker. The other piece of data that we pulled from our technician survey was drive time. So when we look at techs, they're actually pretty dang efficient on average across the Applause customer base. On average, routes have been optimized such that 65% of techs are really only spending less than an hour each day driving to and from appointments, including from their house, coming back to their house at the end of the day. That being said, if routes aren't optimized and techs spend 2 or more hours each day driving, you lose on average 25 to 40% of their working hours spent on non-revenue producing activities, which can be a huge cost up for the business. So definitely something to keep an eye on is that drive time in between appointments, and making sure that routes are optimized because that shows up in your balance sheet. When we look at time on site, this is a really important one to keep eyes on. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on how many services you're being performed, how many different services that customer has. Maybe you're out there doing a lawn treatment, but they've also got mosquito control. Maybe you're doing some perimeter pest control. But the goal here is to set clear expectations for techs of what is an appropriate amount of time to spend on the property so that techs aren't blazing through each job, but they're also not spending super long on each property and wasting time and money. There's definitely a healthy balance there. The other piece that we found in the data is techs are very punctual for the most part. In our survey results, we found that 88% of techs are on time at least 90% of the time. That being said, for those customers that fall within that 10% where the technician's late, that's a huge opportunity to improve customer satisfaction and reduce cancellations. Running too long on one appointment or being late for an appointment ends up having all sorts of downstream negative effects where you're late to the next job, you deliver a lower quality of service because you're trying to rush through it. So setting a clear and easy goal for punctuality it's an easy win for businesses that want to improve customer satisfaction and reduce your cancellations because showing up on time is important. So that being said, let's talk about when we look at the top performers in the green industry, what patterns or trends do we see between top performing companies and the metrics or KPIs that they consistently focus on and that they're having their team give energy to? And really, it's these five that we have here on the screen. So first and foremost, tracking all of this can be a pain. We'll talk a little bit more about ways to help with that. But when we chatted with the different technicians and we looked at the data, we found that customer satisfaction scores like NPS are the number one most tracked metric. It doesn't just reflect that you're getting the job done, but how did the customer feel about it? Were they happy? Did they feel like they did that the technician did a great job? And naturally, having a high CSAT score, customer satisfaction score, is going to lead to more referrals, better retention, better reviews online, which then fuels your growth engine. The other four that we found were route completion, making sure that your leaders are monitoring productivity and making sure that if you had X number of assigned stops, that you're getting them done and that we're not skipping stops or that are outside of the control of technicians or that are within the control of the technicians. And then the last three were customer count per tech, right? So understanding of how many customers do I have each tech servicing? Am I hitting a good balance of quality and quantity where I'm getting enough volume without it impacting the quality of my service? Attendance and punctuality we talked about, very basic but critical. A tech who's late is just going to create all sorts of problems downstream. And then finally, this is a big one, was driving score, which including safe driving behaviors such as avoiding harsh braking, making sure that we're not speeding, and also that we're not distracted drivers. This protects your assets, reduces your at-fault accidents, and ultimately, if you have a higher driver safety score, that's just going to mean less at-fault accidents and lower insurance premiums. So let's talk a little bit about how to pick the ones right for your business, because not every lawn care business or every landscaping business should track the same metrics. Every business is a little bit different. For example, if your business is running 12 jobs a day per guy and you're living on margin, you're getting up to 15, sometimes 20 jobs in a day, you should probably lean pretty hard into efficiency and making sure that we're hitting route completion, time on site, reservice rate. But if you're more of a premium brand and you really want to focus more on the quality side, maybe we want to put more of a focus on that customer experience. So we really want to lean more into NPS, online review scores, maybe even how often the guys are getting shout outs or recognition from your customers. The key is really here to start with the outcomes that you care most about and then work backwards to the behaviors that drive them. So one interesting thing that we found as we analyzed all of this data was that these companies that are within the data set, they're part of what's typically going to be considered the top quartile or top 10% of performance. And that it doesn't come down to luck that they're in that top 10%. It's actually very much by design and by following a tried and proven process that they are able to achieve that level of success. And as we've looked at the data and done research across the industry, we've recognized a pattern and certain systems that are in place that these companies are typically following in order to hit these levels of performance. And at Applause, we describe those commonalities and those systems as the five pillars of service-led growth, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Um, but effectively, before we talk about the five pillars, I think it'd be helpful here to talk about what is this broader idea of service-led growth. What exactly is it? What parallels does it have with some of the most successful tech companies across the world? And how can we leverage it in the home services industry? We've got a couple of different logos here on the slide, which I'm sure a lot of folks will recognize here. But over the last 10, 20 years, this idea of what's called product-led growth, or PLG, has been the defining way to grow for some of these fastest growing and most innovative software companies in the tech industry. The idea of product-led growth is that if you build a great product that's easy to use, that's delightful, and is something that's just gets the job done, people are going to love it. They're going to buy more of it. They're going to tell their friends about it, and that fuels the growth. So how does this relate to the green industry and building a great business from the lawn care or landscaping industry side of things? Really, we like this idea of what's called service-led growth, which would be to focus on your product, which in this instance is going to be your technician, focusing on them, making sure that when your customers are interacting with them, they're having a delightful experience, that they're going above and beyond. I think a lot of us would like to think maybe that the reason someone picks our business is because we have a great looking truck or they like our brand. And while those are important, really what it comes down to is that interaction with the technician. That is your product. Your people are your product. And so whatever we can do to incentivize and direct technicians out in the field to focus on those areas that matter most to the business is going to lead to growth. All right. So when we look at the parallels between these, PLG is going to be focused on how good or sticky your software product is. Service-led growth is going to be focused on is how good, how sticky, and how memorable of an experience are your technicians creating. Which we'll talk more here about how can we drive that SLG. So this core idea is that we can have all sorts of metrics that we're focused on, but end of the day, what matters is what is the experience of the product that we're putting in front of our customers. Things like, is the technician showing up on time? Did they actually listen to and solve the customer's problem? Did they treat the customer with respect? And the inverse of this is also true. When technicians don't treat the customer with respect, or when customers feel like, hey, my problem wasn't solved, the guy was late, they're going to end up canceling and leaving, right? So while these levers can be a huge lever for growth, it can also very quickly go the other way. So let's talk a little bit about how much we can help drive that, and a system that we can use to make sure that every stop a technician's performing is excellent. Before we get into each of these pillars, I wanted to just outline them as far as a little bit of a blurb behind each of them. So number one, when we talk about building a service-led growth engine, would be connecting all of your different systems of record. So that whether that's your CRM, which in the green industry is often going to be something like a Real Green or an Aspire, your driver safety software, pulling that in, your online customer feedback, pulling that all under one unified view. That's sort of your first fundamental step of getting all the data in one spot. The second step and the second pillar is setting clear goals that show progress in real time so your team's all on the same page. It's one thing to have data all coming into one system where people can see the numbers, but it's another thing to know how am I doing against what's expected of me? Am I living up to the mark that's been set by my manager or by my boss, by the owner? The third pillar is setting incentives tied to that performance with key metrics that when they improve are going to lead to revenue growth for your business or cost reductions. So putting incentives behind those KPIs that really help move the needle for the business. The fourth is going to be making sure that when we're interacting with customers, that we're reaching out to them at the peak satisfaction time. So whether that's to collect a review, asking for an upsell for other services that you might offer. If you got a general lawn customer, we want to upsell them to mosquito service, asking for a referral, whatever it may be, making sure that we're asking at that peak level of satisfaction when the customer's happiest. And then fifth, we want to automate this whole thing end to end so that this doesn't end up being something that you have to manually babysit or watch. It's setting those right systems in place and then trusting the process to run on your behalf. So let's dive first into pillar number one, which is connecting your systems. So as I mentioned earlier, service-led growth is fundamentally about optimizing your technician performance. And as we all know, you can't really improve what you don't measure. One of my favorite quotes that's attributed to Carl Pearson is, "That which is measured improves, that which is measured and reported improves exponentially." So as we talk through this, I'd invite us all to consider and think on for a minute, how many of us can, with a high degree of confidence, say that our techs know exactly what's expected of them across all the different metrics we're tracking on their performance? I think when you talk to the average technician, it becomes pretty apparent that it's not really clear which one they should focus on. There's a lot of different things that's flying at them throughout the day, notes on the customer, and it can get really tricky in the green industry to keep track of this. So when we talk about some of those challenges, why is this hard? Why is it hard to track technician performance? And I'd say there's three main reasons. The first reason is, once you get to a certain scale, you're not regularly, if ever, out in the field with your guys. I think that's the goal for a lot of owners, right? Is to get to a size where your guys are running it, your managers are running it, you're not having to be out in the field. But because of that, you don't have that visibility of how is my team performing. The second reason that it's hard to track technician performance is we're often tracking a bunch of different data across different tools, different platforms. And so it's hard to bring that into one spot to know how are we doing day by day. It ends up being a laborious task to pull all those reports. And then third, while there's some level of visibility for leaders, in my experience, technicians rarely, if ever, have access to the CRM data. And when they receive those reports from their manager on how they're doing, those reports are often past looking for a prior month, prior week, even a prior quarter sometimes, instead of having that real-time data where they can course correct immediately. Often what we hear is, a manager will sit down with a technician and review performance or review data, but it's something that's already happened in the past. They can't change that at that point. So the goal here is to bring all of the data in real time into one unified system so that everyone's on the same page and knows exactly what they need to do in order to improve. Once we have all of the data coming in, it's going to be key here to set clear goals and show progress in real time. And again, the goal here is to build an engine of service-led growth, right? So the first thing we need to do is bring the data together. Second is set goals and show our people in real time how are they performing. So once we've established that foundation, we need to let the technicians know where can I take action in order to improve my scores here. So it's all about defining what great actually looks like for your team. And again, this is going to be different for every team. It's going to be different based on the time of year. It's one thing to see all of your data in one spot where people can track their performance, but we also need to make sure that people aren't getting overloaded by all the information that's coming in. So as leaders, it's our job to direct focus on the metrics that matter most to the business and that we need at that point in time. I say that because a lot of my customers, this time of year, it's all about getting production up, making sure that we're hitting our stops. But then later in the season, as we're hitting sort of the busiest point of the summer, it's about keeping that quality up, making sure that we're not blazing through jobs, that we're not getting really high callback rates. So this changes dependent on the time of year that you're in there with your team. So typically, in my experience, the best way to approach this is pick a few key metrics, set clear targets for each one, and then hold your team accountable to those goals. I think where this becomes almost a distraction is when we have too much information coming in. So I think that typically looks like in the green industry, maybe 4 or 5 core metrics that you really want your team to focus on. Um, a good example would be, hey, let's say your goal here is to improve customer retention. A logical flow would be then to really have your team focus on customer satisfaction, maybe their average Google rating at an individual level, their callback rate, and then maybe you have a couple in there around production and safety as well to make sure that it's a nice balanced approach. Um, the reality is all of us have a hard time keeping track of more than a few different things. So picking a limited number of key metrics that matter to the business that given branch or that area of the business needs is really going to be what helps drive that growth. Because ultimately, once the technicians know what good looks like and they know what to focus on, they're going to put a lot more energy towards that. And we're going to start to see that move the needle from your business. The next pillar is all about incentives. So once we've pulled in the data, we've established expectations of what excellent looks like, there's nothing better than putting some money behind it, right? Positive reinforcement is one of the most powerful ways to drive behavioral change. But for positive reinforcement to work, it needs to be timely and it needs to be tied to individual performance. I find far too many companies still rely on annual or quarterly reviews, subjective bonuses, maybe an end of year bonus. The problem with these sort of approaches is it makes it almost impossible for the technician to connect the reward with the behavior that led to it. By the time a technician's getting paid their bonus, they likely don't even remember what they're being rewarded for or the actions they took in order to qualify for that. Because the goal of any incentive is and should really be to drive behavioral change across your team. Study after study shows that the faster someone receives an incentive, the more likely they are to repeat the behavior that led to the reward being given in the first place. So the truth is, whether we care to admit it or not, as human beings, we've all got a little bit of that Pavlov's dog in us. And in the world of instant information, 1-hour delivery, DoorDash, Uber, for better or for worse, we've become programmed to respond to instant rewards and instant gratification. So the faster and the more frequent we can reward and reinforce our teams, the faster we'll see the change and the growth in our business. Last piece on this. While the instant recognition is huge, there's also a key element here of being able to course correct behavior. I mentioned that earlier, but if a technician, I'm getting daily and hourly feedback on my performance rather than a quarterly review, I'm way more likely to adjust that effort and course correct today because I'm, number one, aware of the gap. And two, when I make the change in effort, I'm going to see that immediate impact of my actions playing out because those metrics are updating once every hour. I'm seeing the needle move as I take more time and as I am a little more thoughtful with my customer. I can see my reservice rate start to drop day by day. The fourth pillar is, these first three were a lot about how can we optimize our technicians, but this fourth piece is how can we optimize that interaction with our customer to get great feedback that will also help us grow our business. So as we talk about service-led growth, a huge lever here is going to be public feedback. It's great to get CSAT scores on knowing how we can improve, but we also want those happy customers to share that online in the form of a Google review where it's visible and where potential customers, when they're looking at who to use for a service, are going to look at your company because you're showing up at the top of the rankings. Quick stats on this, 93% of homeowners look at Google reviews before making a purchasing decision. And companies that have a 4.8 star or higher rating experience on average 31% higher sales than their peers with low reviews. So that this fourth pillar is really about getting as many positive reviews from your customers as you can without incentive, while still staying within Google's policies. Most customers, they end up asking for reviews or referrals from customers often days or weeks after the service is done. But by then, again, short attention spans, the customers, not thinking about you at that point. As much as we like to think that we're sitting there thinking about our lawn or our landscaping company, by then their customer satisfaction's faded. They're not really thinking about that. They're on to better things. So it's really important here to not only ask quickly, but ask at that level of peak satisfaction or peak happiness, which typically I found in the green industry is right after the technicians solve the customer's problem. They've been out there, they've interfaced with the customer, they did a great job, they picked the toys up off the lawn, they went above and beyond, but they've also left the home so it doesn't feel pushy. So timing that request so that it's shortly after the visit's completed, maybe the tech's on their way to their next stop, and then the customer has a chance to leave the feedback. That's going to just see far better results when it comes to getting online reviews, getting referrals, tips, upsells, whatever it may be. And then this final pillar is really important here. It's about bringing all this together and automating it. The last thing you want to do is give yourself tons of more homework and chores to work on. Okay, I've got to set these expectations. I got to get a whiteboard. I got to do this. We want to build a well-oiled machine that's running in the background and requires minimal oversight or manual effort on you or your team's part. Um, Unfortunately, for a lot of businesses, performance tracking and recognition are still very much a manual and pretty sporadic process. Often I'll hear of managers handing out an attaboy at random, or even tracking performance on updating spreadsheets on a whiteboard in the office, maybe chalkboards. I don't think chalkboards are a thing anymore, but you get the idea. They're doing manual things instead of it being automated. Uh, and while tracking something is better than not tracking at all, if you're tracking and rewarding performance this way, it's ultimately going to be inconsistent, it's going to be unreliable, and it's going to leave a lot of room for human error, which ultimately, if the data is wrong, then your people are not going to be happy. So we want to remove that human error, but we also want to make this something that will scale as you grow your team. Any time that you're spending now on tracking and manually putting these things together only grows larger and becomes more of a time commitment as your business grows. So there's ultimately going to be a lot of dividends of investing now on systems that will scale and grow with you. So in order for service-led growth to work, we really need it to be automated. We need it to be a performance scorecard that updates in real time. It doesn't need any sort of human intervention. And specifically, we need a tool that's going to track the same metrics for all of our people. It's going to keep a live and running tally of everyone's stands and create some of that friendly competition so that technicians know, where do I stand? What am I being measured on? And what do I need to do in order to hit success at my company? Not only will that help you get to your business goals, but it will also make it just a more enjoyable place to work for your technicians. They're going to want to stick around longer because they know I'm doing a good job, and I feel the way I'm being evaluated is fair and objective. So the vision here is to have a platform that drives that automated performance and pays the incentive on your behalf once the expectation's met. What this will do for the business is it gives you far much more means to measure and motivate your techs consistently without any sort of manual effort from your team, regardless of how many technicians you have as you scale and grow the business. So conveniently, the shameless plug here, that's exactly where Applause comes in. We want to help you turn that great service that your teams are delivering into automatic business growth. So if I had to sum up what Applause does in one sentence, it would be something like, Applause motivates your team to think and operate like a business owner by recognizing and rewarding your team for going above and beyond on the metrics that matter most to you. Really, we want to turn each of your guys into a mini owner. And the way we do that is by giving them a level of ownership of metrics, giving them a level of ownership of customer feedback, and giving them a reward when they hit that. So we'll talk a little bit about here how we can accomplish that through employee scorecards. So like when we talked about the 5 pillars of service-led growth, a huge component of this is setting clear expectations for your team and then automatically showing how they're performing against that expectation using the data from your core CRM, your driver safety software, your CSR calling software, bringing it all into one system where the technician can see how they're performing. Right now, techs have to look a lot of different places and often don't really have that visibility that you do as a leader. So Applause scorecards puts everyone on the same page and updates typically on an hourly cadence. So techs know at any given time exactly where they stand and how they can improve. You can also see here on the slide that we can ingest just about any metric that really matters to the business. but you as a leader decide what the focus metrics are for your team. Because again, we don't want it to become analysis paralysis where there's too much coming in. So a lot of my customers will often switch out these focus metrics of um, depending on the time of year, depending on the branch even. This branch maybe is doing great with reservice rate, but this other one is struggling with driver safety. So we're going to set different incentives and different ways to measure them branch by branch. We can even do this based on the different types of employees you have. Um, and the power here is Applause gives you the flexibility and the ability to drive improvements and attention from your team on the areas of the business that need the most attention. Um, Once we've defined those core metrics of what you want your team to focus on and improve for that moment in time, you as the business owner can decide what great looks like. You're going to set an expectation of your team of where you want them to be, and then to drive that home, we got to lean into that Pavlovian dog that we all have inside of us, and we put an automated bonus behind it that's paid out once that expectation is hit. So again, it's not something that's coming through payroll, but it's going to be paid into an app where each of your guys can see how am I doing. Oh, and once I hit that expectation, instantly I'm going to have cash in my wallet that I can then cash out and use on my family for that Friday dinner we've got coming up, or I'm going to save up for Christmas. Uh, Gone are the days of manually needing to track and update a spreadsheet or putting this on a whiteboard. The goal here is to set an expectation, pick a bonus amount that you feel comfortable paying to your team, and then watch the magic work as Applause automatically tracks, pays, and recognizes your team for thinking and operating like a business owner. The last couple of slides here, we'll talk a little bit about this idea of a power score. So, um, like we mentioned before, we don't want a technician that's just going to complete a bunch of jobs, but is doing a really terrible job. So you're having high reservice rates. We also don't want someone who's really great at reservice rates, but drives like a maniac. So what most of my customers do is they'll sit down and they will think of what does the ideal technician look like. As you can see here on the screen, we can pull different metrics and have different weights associated to them. So you can say, hey, I want my technicians to be focused on safety, quality, and quantity, and I'm going to have each part of that make up a component of one easy to digest score that if they hit and if they qualify for this score, they'll automatically get paid a bonus, and they can see at any given moment, where am I falling short? The goal of a power score is for a technician to quickly be able to see I'm at 75 and I need to be at 90. Click into what's happening on and I can quickly see, oh, what's bringing me down is my reservice rate. I'm going to focus more on talking with the customer after I've completed, making sure that they're feeling happy, spending enough time on each job so that my reservice rate goes down and I qualify for this bonus. And so I beat my peers. There's obviously a component of competition here as well. And speaking of competitions, a lot of customers, we can run these manually, where I imagine a lot of people here on the call have done sort of competitions around production or around customer satisfaction. But again, it's time consuming. It's kind of a headache to sit down and track all of that, put it together with spreadsheets, whiteboards. Instead, the goal here is to set the competition, center it around a metric that you care about, put the bonus amounts on there, and then let Applause do the rest of the work so that we're tracking it for you. We're letting the team know at any given moment where they stand relative to their peers, what their opportunity is for earnings, where they can see all this within their Applause mobile app. And then ultimately we pay out those incentives as soon as the competition is over. So the goal here is, again, set it and forget it, but then put it in a way that your team is looking at it daily. On average, Applause customers find that their technicians log into our app 3 to 4 times daily, which indicates a really high degree of engagement, that they care about what's going on in the app. They want to be better than their peers. They want to hear about the feedback that they're getting from their customers, and they want to see those 5-star reviews coming in so that each time that's happening, whether that's a positive NPS, whether that's positive 5-star review, they're getting that ping on their phone letting them know you're doing a great job and your work matters. So appreciate everyone's time today. I think to sum it up, Applause's goal is to help you drive service-led growth by getting your people to care and think more like a business owner. And the way we can accomplish that is by setting employee scorecards with instant incentives and rewarding your people for going above and beyond. So I'll pause now here for some questions, and appreciate everyone's time. Jimmy, I think you're muted potentially. Technical difficulties, always fun.
Okay.
There we go. Oh, we heard you for a second there, Jimmy.
All right, can you hear me now, Andy?
Yes.
Awesome.
Turn your volume down and we'll use mine.
Got it. Okay. So the first, sorry about the technical difficulties there. The first question that we have is how would you measure customer count and job execution? And how well would we serve the customers? Or how well did we serve customers?
Yeah. So when we talk about, so it sounds like there's two parts to that. How do we measure the count and then the satisfaction of customers? And then what was the second part?
How the second part says and how well we serve customers.
Got it. Yeah. So we're ingesting all the data from your CRM, right? So if you're using something like Real Green or Aspire, we're pulling all that in. So you'll get a really quickly an idea and a count of your unique customers that are coming in. We'll also see every single completed job that's coming through. So with Applause, you'll have that visibility of how that's happening. And then in terms of how we're doing and how we're performing, we didn't talk about this as much on the webinar today, but our system automatically sends a text message after a job is completed, asking for feedback of how did we do. The customer then has a chance to rate the technician's performance. That's then tied to that customer, and also is if it's positive, it would then be pushed automatically to the technician, so they hear how they're doing. And then as a manager, you'll have a report that shows your overall NPS or your customer satisfaction score that allows you guys to make informed business decisions of what do our customers love about our service and what do they not like. The positive and the negative feedback are both really helpful there.
Awesome, Andy. The next question we have is, given that most techs are early on in their career, do you have any tips for optimizing the onboarding process?
That's a good question. I would say for those folks that are earlier in their career, maybe they're a little bit younger, like that Gen Z or like millennial population. I think a lot of it, what's going to appeal to them is gamifying the process and making it fun, right? I think making it fun, meeting them where they're at. A lot of these folks have been playing video games for most of their lives, right? So I think the more that we can lean into that of this competition, this idea of gamification is going to be huge. I also think there's going to be a huge element there of painting a picture of a long-term career. So they have this broader vision of what's possible if they perform at a high level, and they view that their time at your organization as a long-term career where they can grow into leadership or grow into whatever their career goals are, rather than just like, hey, I'm going to stick around here till the next best thing comes around. So I think it's all about gamification, making it fun, and then painting a vision of a path to promotion and path to financial success.
All right, so we have talked a little bit about customer feedback. And if techs are most motivated by that customer feedback, how can I let my techs know when customers give them positive feedback throughout the day?
Yeah. We think about that for a second. So, I think traditionally I've often heard from customers that they'll do something like they'll have a board where they write down like attaboys as good stuff comes in. And that's a good idea. I think the problem with that is that it becomes pretty manual. You're having to track it all, and then the techs are only hearing about it once they come to the office. Uh, Shameless plug for Applause here is if you're using our platform, anytime a customer says something positive, we'll actually send a push notification to their phone, right? So right on their phone in their app, they'll see, I just got a 10 out of 10 from a customer. Here's what they said about what they love about the service. They mentioned that they love how thoughtful I am. I always pull the trash cans in. I always pick up the toys off the lawn. I'm going to keep on doing that. Same thing for any time that a 5-star review comes in. So it's this idea of instant feedback that also helps create some friendly competition, because anytime that positive feedback comes into the app, there's also going to be an activity feed where they can see what all their peers, all the good stuff that people are saying. So it's going to motivate them to care a little bit more. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. Most other ways are going to get pretty manual.
So obviously 5 stars is the goal, right? But for companies with below 5 stars or even 4.5 stars, how can they quickly improve their review score?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing might sound a little bit obvious and a little bit on the nose, but the first thing is to start intentionally asking for reviews and then rewarding your team getting those 5-star reviews. I've seen in this instance like competitions working really well to drive up your review numbers as well as the quality, because then you've got your techs maybe vying for those top 3 or 4 spots where they get a cash reward. Um, Often, if you have multiple branches, you can even have like branches compete against each other, where you've got like north versus the south, or you've got east versus west. Um, where this starts to break down, in my experience on competitions, is if you're trying to track it all and do it all on your own, it becomes a bit of a headache, because it works. I talk to customers all the time. It's like, oh yeah, we used to offer $5 for every 5-star review, but we stopped doing that because our office manager was about to perform a mutiny and leave the company. So where applause comes in is we'll track all that on behalf of your team. We'll track the competition, and then we actually pay out those incentives as they come around. So we um, text within an hour of them getting a 5-star review, we'll get that bonus or incentive in their digital wallet. So they immediately can associate, oh, when I do this, customers leave me a 5-star review, and I'm going to do that behavior that led to me getting that 5-star review. So I think in summary, like talking about increasing your scores, it's all about putting a competition in place, putting incentives in place, and then just making it visible and easy to track.
I wanted to jump and change subjects here just a little bit, but another question that came in is, what is the best way to reduce reservices rate?
Yeah, I think reservices and callbacks typically, in my experience, happen because the technician's trying to move too fast and isn't focused on keeping the quality up. Normally, it's, hey, I've got a production number to meet, and I'm gonna hit that production number, get through my stops. Not always, I say typically because sometimes you're gonna have those random ones where customers asking for a retreat and it's nothing that the technician could have controlled. But the vast majority of the time, it's because we're focusing on the wrong things and it's a bit of an incentive problem. So in my experience, as soon as we start to consistently track it and put some money behind keeping reservice rates down, and then showing your team and ranking them against each other, you're going to quickly get to that healthy level of reservices, because there is a healthy level, right? You don't want, if you're at 0, that means maybe you're spending too much time on each lawn, but around that 2% mark is sort of that gold standard. So as soon as we start to tell customers, as soon as we start to tell our technicians that we care about reservices and we have money behind it, in my experience, I typically see reservice rates improve pretty quickly.
We had a question come in, and it focuses a little bit on best ways to motivate techs. And I know you kind of touched a little bit on that, but are there some other ways that you would encourage companies to motivate their technicians?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we talk about motivating technicians, I think it's most people are motivated by, in my experience, uh, recognition, right? Like getting some sort of either public or private recognition, depending on the person. Obviously, money, and then knowing where they stand relative to their peers, feeling like that what they're doing is meaningful and that they're great at what they do, right? So I think whatever you can do to create that environment in your company of letting your technicians know often that what you do matters, people care about it, people like what you do, and actually we're gonna put money behind that. We're gonna pay you for that. We're gonna create a bonus system that's structured around that. I think ultimately is what helps motivate technicians the most, right? It's feeling like what they do matters, that they're recognized, that they're seen, and that they're being compensated for it.
One of the other questions that came in is about software integration, and I'm curious if the software integrates with program or other software like Real Green.
Absolutely, yeah. So we integrate with I think it's over 50 different CRMs that are all in the field services space. Real Green, absolutely. Aspire, Jobber, Service Autopilot are some of the more common ones that I see in the green industry. And then if we don't integrate with your system today, we're always looking for new opportunities to build out integrations, right? So we've tried to make it so we integrate with all the major CRMs in the space.
And one of the last questions I see here is, are there any quick wins for improving customer satisfaction scores?
Yeah, I would say if you're trying to get your customer satisfaction score up quickly, again, it's going to sound a little obvious, but I think the first thing to do is to start asking, like, how do customers feel about the service? Very quickly, you're going to realize where are we doing great and where are we falling short? Like, where's our opportunity to grow? Once you've got enough of that data, I think you can then run a pretty strong analysis and look for patterns of, hey, let's look at all of our tens and nines from customers. What's the commonality there of what people are saying? What's the service type that people are really happy with versus not? Um, and then the inverse is true. Looking at the zeros and the ones, the one-star reviews on Google, like what's the pattern there? Do we notice that people are often complaining about punctuality? Are they complaining about price, or whatever it may be? We're going to learn something by asking from customers, and then from there, doubling down on the things that people love and coaching your team to avoid the things that are negative commonalities. It's all pretty obvious, but I might sound kind of obvious, but at the end of the day, like there's a lot of power in just having that data in the first place, so you can do something with it.
Okay, Andy, we did actually get one more question come in, and I want to make sure that we get it in here. But can Applause measure sales from Real Green or one of the other CRMs that you mentioned from before?
Yeah, I actually saw that from Kevin Vidrine, which good to see you, Kevin, as one of my customers. So Kevin, the answer on that is today it's not possible, but it's actually on our roadmap for this quarter. So meaning by end of June, we are going to be giving a big upgrade to Real Green in general. And my understanding is that one of those metrics we're going to be pulling in is sales, which will be huge. I know that's a big one for teams out there.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Andy. Andy, I believe you had one more slide you wanted to show before we.
Oh, yep. Absolutely. Yep. Good call there. Yeah. As promised, I wanted to make this benchmark report available to everyone, right? So if you scan that QR code, you'll have a chance to download the industry benchmark report that we referenced here in my presentation. I also would welcome anyone that wants to get in touch. Feel free to reach out directly to me. You can go to our website, applaushq.com, or email me at andy@applaushq.com. Happy to, I know we had a lot of questions on it. We got to all of them today. So if I didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out to me directly. And my team will probably be reaching out as well to make sure that we get all those questions answered. So really appreciate everyone's time today. It's been a pleasure spending an hour with you all. Appreciate everyone taking some time out of their busy days. And absolutely, please download that report. I think there's a ton of value in there and should really give you an idea of where you stand relative to your peers and opportunities to grow.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Andy. And thanks to everyone for attending today's event. As a reminder, if you jumped on late or missed anything, you are going to receive a recording of this webinar later down the road. Thank you all again, and we will catch you here next time.
Thanks all.